Good evening, I'm Gloria Reed, co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metropolitan area. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League is not limited to women. Men can join in the fight as well. On behalf of all the members of the Rochester Metropolitan Area League of Women Voters, I'd like to welcome you to our March Forum, the grand jury system, who, what, where, when, why, and how. We are proud to present this panel discussion on this important issue, and we are especially pleased to be able to offer a question and answer segment following the presentations. We request, of course, that all our guests respect our panel, our hosts here at Asbury First United Methodist Church, and the League's own commitment to civil and respectful discourse. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished moderator this evening, the Reverend Lawrence Hargrave, pastor of Outreach and Community Connections at Asbury First United Methodist Church. Thank you.
Good evening. For some of you who don't know Asbury, we are a church. And we are a church where all are welcome. So take that as an invitation if you don't have a church home. We do a lot for this community. You hear about almost daily the issues of poverty, and we do a lot for poor people. In our building over here, we have a storehouse where we supply clothing for 6,000 families over a year's time. In our next building over here, we do short-term housing for homeless families as part of the RAIN program. And in the lower level, we feed 3,000 hungry souls per month. Basement of this building, we have a free clinic for those who do not have health insurance every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. We do a lot rather than being just what some people think our church. And one of the things that we've been doing of late is hosting conversations around issues of the day. And I am one who believes that even if you're not a church person, if there's not a place that you can have a calm, respectful, civil discussion, one place I'm convinced and convicted should be is the church.
Amen.
You got a church man? So with that being said, I will introduce our two speakers and they'll present, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers and conversations. Our first presenter will be District Attorney Sandra Dorley, who was elected in 2011. She's the first female district attorney in Monroe County history, and prior to assuming the office, worked as a prosecutor for over 20 years. She doesn't look like she's been around that. She's recognized nationally as a leader in the prosecution of cold cases using DNA evidence, like you see on TV. And a recipient of dozens of awards, including the Robert M. Morgenthau Award. In addition to her duties in law enforcement, she's a member of a number of different organizations. She is a graduate of the Syracuse University School of Law and currently lives with her family in Webster. Roger Bazil received his bachelor's degree from the State University of New York College at Oneonta. He attended Albany Law School, where he was a member of the Law Review. After graduation, moved to New York City, where he worked as a staff attorney for the Legal Aid Society. He eventually became the director of the Legal Aid Society's Parole Revocation Defense Unit. He co-authored the New York State Defenders Association outline on parole representation. In 1989, we were blessed to have him move to Rochester, where he took a position with the Monroe County Public Defender's Office. He's worked in that office as an appeals attorney, trial attorney, and supervising attorney for the past 25 years.
And looks good.
I won't comment on that. I will say that we had a conversation about who's going to retire first. He is a guest lecturer at Syracuse University School of Law, and I am pleased to have these two very knowledgeable representatives of our New York State law. And so, on that note, would you please welcome District Attorney Dorley.
Fantastic, I love the microphone. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. This afternoon, I actually had the privilege of being with these two fine gentlemen, and we were down at the XXI studio with Ed Dawson, and we did sort of a little preview of the grand jury system and what we hope to accomplish here this evening. What I thought would be helpful is just first of all going over the grand jury process for you and explaining it to you. I think when I come out and I speak to members of the community, people who haven't served on grand jury or who haven't been through the criminal justice system as attorneys, they may not be familiar with the process. So I want to just explain that to you. And then I would really love for us to get to the heart of it, which is the question and answer period, because I think there's so many questions and so many that you have and so many answers that we can provide. So let me just tell you a little bit about the DA's office. We have 81 attorneys, a total staff of 140. It's a very large law firm. On any given year, we deal with approximately 20,000 misdemeanor cases and close to 5,000 felonies for any given year. In 2014, our office took in 4,716 felony investigations. So those are a lot of cases that come before us. But in New York State, in order for anyone to be prosecuted on a felony, it must go through the grand jury, and that's why this process is so important. There are ways that an individual can bypass the grand jury process. It would be something that you may know as a plea bargain. But if someone in New York State is charged with a felony and everyone is in agreement, the judge, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and the defendant, they can go right to court, plead guilty, receive a sentence, and carry on that sentence. That is called a waiver of indictment. That waives the grand jury process. All other individuals who are to be prosecuted on felonies in New York State must go through the grand jury process. So here in Monroe County, we have 2 grand juries that sit 5 days a week. One grand jury sits 5 days a week for 4 weeks. You are selected for that as you are for any trial jury. Your name is picked from a hat. You are given a summons, a party invitation we like to say, and you come down and you are seated on a grand jury. So grand jury 1 is a full-time grand jury, again 5 days a week, 4 weeks, that's their term. We have another grand jury 2, which is a little more user-friendly to those of you in the work world. You only meet 3 days a week, so you've got some flexibility. So those grand juries, they stagger, but there is always a grand jury in session so that we can present those felony cases to a grand jury for their review. A grand jury standard is different from a trial standard. Everyone knows that if a person goes to trial, they must be convicted by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In a grand jury, the standard is different because it's the vehicle by which the person is actually charged and then brought before a superior court. So the standard is reasonable cause to believe that the felony has been committed. So it's a much lower standard. So what would typically happen if someone was arrested, say, by the Rochester Police Department for a rape, a robbery, a murder, so on and so forth? That case would be presented to a grand jury. The grand jury would hear evidence. There is no defendant in the grand jury. There is no judge in the grand jury. There is no defense counsel in the grand jury. It's just the prosecutor, 23 members who are chosen for grand jury duty. So the prosecutor will bring in a witness. There will be an exchange where facts are disclosed. The prosecutor will then read law and then leave the room. And the grand jury will decide whether or not there is reasonable cause to believe that the individual committed the felony. If they find that there is a reasonable cause to believe, the grand jury will hand up a bill or an indictment. And that thereby becomes the vehicle by which the person is tried in superior court. A defendant has an absolute right to testify before a grand jury, but that notice has to be given to the prosecution. And also the defendant has the right to offer witnesses. So if a defendant wants to present certain facts to a grand jury, they may ask the grand jury to consider X, Y, and Z. The grand jury would vote on that, and that would become part of the record. When a grand jury comes into Monroe County, the grand jury is given instructions by a judge. We have Judge Pampiano here, and Judge has impaneled many a grand jury where the judge will go over all of the legal instructions and the legal ramifications and the duties of the grand jury. The grand jury will then come in and hear these particular cases. If a grand juror decides that there is not sufficient evidence to charge someone or indict someone with a crime, they will issue a no bill or a no cause for action. Once a no cause or a no bill is issued, the case is sealed and the person cannot be, tried again on that offense unless we receive a court order. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the grand jury process. So let's talk about transparency. If anyone has read, I did a speaking out piece in the newspaper, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, in light of everything that's going on in Ferguson and the Eric Garner case in Staten Island, and this grand jury process that has been in place for a very long time, and Mr. Brazil will tell you about it. It's being looked at again, and the question is, well, what can we do? Does it need to be fixed? And I, as your district attorney, I think it does. I think there needs to be more transparency. The grand jury is a secret proceeding, which means that you cannot talk about what occurred within the grand jury room. If any of you have sat on grand jury duty, one of the instructions that Judge Pampiano would give you is that you cannot divulge what occurs within the grand jury because it is a secret proceeding. Yes, that veil of secrecy is needed, but there also needs to be some transparency. For example, when the no bill or decision not to charge occurred in Ferguson, the district attorney was able to get up in front of a bank of cameras and he was able to talk about the proceeding, talk about the facts, talk about the evidence and the law. In New York, we are forbidden from doing that. What we need is more transparency to be able to report back to the community if there happened to be an incident involving, just say, a police and an unarmed citizen encounter, and a grand jury determined or issued a no bill. I would want the law to allow me to get up and address the community of which I represent. Right now, the DA's Association of the State of New York, which there are 62 counties in the state, there are 62 of us elected officials, there's something we actually agree on. And if you know, it's very difficult for 62 people to actually agree on something.